Thank you so much for your patience as it took a second to get signed in here. Had a little bit of technical difficulties, but without further ado, I suppose we should get started. So this evening's topic is getting protein and essential nutrients as a vegan, especially if you are on GLP-1 weight loss medications. And so this touches on veganism in general, but also some special considerations you might need to take into account. As always, if there are any questions, feel free to reach out with the Q&A button at the bottom of the left-hand screen, and I'd be happy to address those as they come in. Thank you so much. Like I say at the beginning of all of these, remember that the quality of your calories matters. And even though many people consider veganism to be healthy, you can still have poor quality choices with just about any diet. So it's always important to keep that at front of mind. So what we'll cover today is first, we'll touch on what the definition of vegan even is, since some people may not be aware that there are some differences between vegan and other plant-based diets. We'll touch on some specific challenges that come with a vegan diet, as well as what may further enhance those challenges if you're on a GLP-1 medicine. We'll look at some plant-based protein sources, as well as some vegan appropriate protein supplements that may be helpful. And there are some other nutrients that are worth considering if you are following a vegan diet, and especially if you are on these medications. As always, at the end, of course, I'll be allowing time for any questions that come up. And let's get going. So first of all, how does the vegan diet differ from other plant-based diets? So the definition of vegan is essentially no animal products whatsoever. This is not just restriction on meat, poultry, or fish, but they also eliminate eggs, dairy, even honey. And there are also vegans, many vegans, who will not wear any clothing that comes from animals, such as leather and usually wool. So there's no animal products whatsoever, diet, lifestyle, etc. For, I guess you could say, more liberalized diet, then we move on to vegetarian, and which is broadly defined as no animal flesh. Although you will see different forms of vegetarianism. You'll see vegetarians who are pescatarians, so they don't eat meat or chicken, but they'll eat fish and seafood. There's also a lacto-vegetarian or an ovo-lacto-vegetarian, depending, where they may avoid all animal products, but might allow dairy or eggs into their diet, or may exclude one or the other. And then finally, there is a flexitarian, which I suppose I could identify myself as being, where primarily plant-based, but willing to eat animal products and meat. Then, of course, there's the omnivore, which is the just general diet. I suppose I should mention there. People can elect to be one or may go between various versions of these diets, and some of them, it has to do with animal welfare or perhaps the ethics behind the way animals are raised and bred. Other people do it for health reasons. It could have a variety of reasons behind that. Now, with veganism, there are some nutritional challenges that come as a part of the deal, if you will, just by the nature of how much more restrictive it can be in certain areas. Then with having a decreased appetite, most likely if you are on a GLP-1 medication, that can lead to decreased intake of healthy foods and nutrients. So you may have already been eating healthily as a vegan, but you're taking one of these medications, and now the calorie levels may not be as high. The ease of getting in certain nutrients might not come so easily, right? And so one of the primary areas that we look at is protein, of course. And there are concerns about the protein bioavailability and the quality that you get from plant-based proteins. So bioavailability essentially means how easily or efficiently a nutrient can be absorbed and used by the body. And it's commonly thought that plant-based proteins aren't quite as easily digested and absorbed as, say, animal-based proteins. There are some people that debate just how poorly they're digested and absorbed, but many plant-based proteins are digested and absorbed easily enough that eating a variety along with eating enough calories should be sufficient. And you'll see I bolded the enough calories there because usually with GLP-1 or weight loss medications, the enough calorie part may be the bigger part of the challenge and not necessarily getting in the variety. Also, protein quality. So this one again is somewhat where you could say maybe debated because yes, not all plant-based proteins are considered to be complete proteins. And if you were with me for one of my previous presentations, a complete protein means that it has all the 9 essential amino acids that our bodies cannot make on its own. And the most limiting of the amino acids for someone who's on a vegan diet is lysine. Again, that's why I put that in bold and listed underneath. But lysine around 38 milligrams a day for adults is recommended. It depends. And also you're unlikely to easily find lysine and its quantity listed in many nutrition labels or anything like that. So those are some of the primary concerns when it comes to these nutritional challenges. And there's some additional ones with vitamins and minerals, and we'll touch on those later. So looking at the plant-based protein options and also with the consideration of lysine being the main essential amino acid that you might need to consider or a little more or place a little more importance on just because it's a little more limited in plant-based proteins. I've listed on the side here some of the food items that you can get from legumes as well as nuts, seeds, and grains. So I list out the serving size, how much protein per serving, and the lysine content per serving on each one as well. I wanted to make sure I listed that out. So with enough variety, you can get that in. And I wanted to make sure you were aware of some of the best sources here. As you know, some general protein recommendations, which you can also find in your booklet from Premier Weight Loss, is about 90 grams a day of protein for women and 120 grams a day of protein for men, although this can vary depending on your individual needs. And I wanted to also touch on, since we were talking about essential amino acids and protein quality, you may be familiar with, if you're following a vegan diet, that there used to be this trend or myth or recommendation to combine certain foods. So some that have a higher amount of essential amino acids should be combined with another that has different amino acids in higher levels to try and get complete proteins at every meal. That's really not necessary anymore. As long as you are eating a variety of protein-based foods throughout the day, you should be able to meet your needs. So it's not like you have to line up beans and rice, which was a commonly recommended combination. Still delicious, and you're welcome to do that, but you don't have to do that in order to make the protein count. So I wanted to make sure that was communicated. Now, considering I've talked about appetite being likely lower and therefore difficult to get in enough protein when your calorie intake is lower, this is when it might be reasonable to consider protein supplements, of course. And so some protein supplement options to consider are the following plant-based protein options that are also fairly common. I listed some brand names for a few here based on whether or not they've been recently reviewed and approved by a third-party testing group, just to make sure that the quality is good enough so I can feel comfortable openly recommending them here. So this year, the company didn't do a third-party test of a soy-based protein powder, but soy protein is a fantastic choice, and I'll be happy to suggest some brands when I can see that there have been some new reviews done. But pea protein, the Now Sports pea protein has been considered very good quality. We've also got a good hemp protein option. The peanut protein here, this is actually sort of a powdered peanut butter. And so one of the nice things about that is when you mix it with water to remix it and making it a peanut butter, the fat content, which I normally don't have a problem with, uh, is drastically lowered in this case, which may be helpful just to be mindful of fat intake, or if you have trouble tolerating full fat peanut butter, this is a really good way to get in protein without fat content. Also, there are some mixed sources of protein powder, so it may be a combination of pea and soy, hemp, et cetera, also some rice protein you'll see listed in there. And some decent brands are the following. Even Shakeology makes an appearance here. They have a plant-based option. Kachava, which I've heard advertised more frequently as of late, also has gotten basically the seal of approval. And that one can be considered a meal replacement as well, considering how much of the other macronutrients it contains. So these are some options that you could consider. Some additional nutrients that are worth considering, especially when following a vegan diet in general, but also, again, especially if on a weight loss medication, are on the next following slides. So first and foremost, vitamin B12. You will likely need supplementation. Whether or not you're taking these medications, vitamin B12 is difficult to encounter in foods that are not animal-based. You can find them in some fortified foods, such as nutritional yeast or some fortified meat substitutes, cereals, or soy milk. But it's very, very important to read the labels on any of these because not all of them are fortified, or they might not have as much as you're looking for. So that's when supplementation may be worth, or actually most likely will be worth looking into. Cyanocobalamin is the most frequent plant-based, if you will, version. So vegan B12 supplements are usually in the cyanocobalamin form, but not always. And choosing higher doses would be recommended if you are verified to be deficient in vitamin B12. That being said, it's oftentimes hard to find lower doses than the 500 to 1,000 microgram amounts. So if those are the levels you can only find, but you're not verifiably deficient, you just want to make sure that you're preventing it, then it's more recommended to take maybe one of those 3 times a week or twice a week, something like that, to extend out the dosage. I will mention, I think I list it later on, but I should say that one very popular and well-reviewed supplement brand for vegans is called Diva, D-E-V-A, and they do, of course, have a vitamin B12 option available. Moving on to iron. So iron may or may not be something that you are deficient in, but I wanted to at least give a tip here that if you're consuming foods that are high in iron, which happens with many plant-based foods, especially the green leafy types, spinach always comes to mind for most people, it's very helpful to consume them with foods that are also high in vitamin C. Vitamin C kind of unlocks that iron and helps it get absorbed into your intestines and move on into your body to be used. So sources of vitamin C are oranges, bell peppers, especially strawberries, also some other leafy green veggies. So those can be very helpful. Or, and I should have listed, tomatoes can also be very helpful, having some vitamin C in there too. Calcium. So calcium absorption, just so you're aware, it can be impacted or impeded by some the compound called oxalate, which oxalate content can be higher in some leafy green vegetables, such as Swiss chard or spinach or rhubarb. And so that can sometimes interfere. They like to sort of bind together in a way. But there are some leafy greens that have better absorbed calcium because they're lower in oxalate content, such as kale or turnip and mustard greens. Also, you can find some fortified foods such as calcium set tofu or fortified plant milks. You'll frequently find it there. And fortified juices, I listed it because it does exist, although I strongly recommend avoiding fruit juice whenever possible if you can opt for these other options. Moving on to some additional nutrients. So vitamin D, this can apply for almost everyone. It's found in very few foods, and it's typically made in our bodies with sun exposure. But considering how much we value sunscreen, that can make that a little difficult to have our body convert any of our sun exposure into vitamin D. There are some food options available. There are fortified cereals, again, also fortified plant milks. And in one rare situation, there are some, maybe not rare, but one of the only options out there for a true food that's not necessarily fortified are mushrooms that are commercially exposed to UV light. They can be an excellent source, but that does require that you pick out the proper mushrooms and enjoy them enough to eat them in sufficient quantities. So just be aware, again, that might be some area where supplementation is necessary. In terms of omega-3s, just be aware ALA content, or ALA, which is one of the omega-3 fatty acids out there, that can be found in plant foods. And there was a study done where they found vegans and vegetarians actually tended to have higher amounts of ALA omega-3s versus people who ate meat. So that's a win for the vegetarians and vegans there. And to find omega-3s, some good food sources are flaxseed and flaxseed oil, chia seeds, and walnuts. In terms of supplementation, your body can make EPA and DHA, but some vegans do opt to take a supplement as well, and you just want it to be from algal oil instead of, say, the fish oils, right? And so that's usually very easy to find, but I wanted to mention that as well. Iodine was one that surprised me. That does seem to be something that people may need supplementation on. In terms of foods, iodized salt is definitely the most reliable source, and you don't need a whole lot to meet your iodine needs. Maybe a quarter of a teaspoon for the entire day, maximum. And so choosing iodized salt can be very helpful and usually an easy solution, depending on the situation. That being said, people, with the advent of some more fashionable salts, if you will, things like pink Himalayan salt, kosher salt, and all those versions are generally not fortified, not iodized. So you do want to look for a more simple salt, if you will. And as long as it says iodized, that's what you want to look for. It doesn't mean you can't use the others in moderation, really all of them in moderation, but just be aware to look for that in particular. Yes, and oh yes, it naturally does occur in seaweed or nori, and I know people do like to snack on that, but the amount can vary drastically between the type, the brand, when it's harvested. So just be aware that that might not be so reliable or consistent. And finally, this one, it may be an impact, but not necessarily, but I wanted to list it. It's called choline, and it is essential for brain function, essential for memory formation. A sign of deficiency is, and this surprised me actually, I wasn't aware of this one, is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So if you are deficient in it, you will most likely know about it. You will likely be informed about it. So it is important, just be aware, aim for food sources instead of supplements, unless directed by your provider. It doesn't seem very likely, again, if you're having a variety of foods, that you will be deficient in this, and trying to supplement will not necessarily be all that helpful. In fact, it can be harmful if you're supplementing and don't need it. So just aim for food sources, and some good sources are soy, legumes again, as well as quinoa, nuts, and seeds. So if you're being healthy with vegan choices in general, chances are you'll meet the choline needs, but I wanted to mention that. Now, in reading about vegan nutrition and veganism, I realized that hopefully this presentation is helpful. But if you want some further resources or further information that you can use and go back to time and again, I wanted to give you some options of some reliable sources that are going to be evidence-based and fact-checked frequently. So the first one is actually a dietetic practice group of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So VNDPG, so it does say vegetarian nutrition, but they do discuss vegan topics. There's also veganhealth.org, which gives a lot of evidence-based information. And there are many vegan dietitians out there with some good websites. The Vegan RD, she had an excellent site in that it was very user-friendly, had sort of a veganism 101 with various topics. So I wanted to make sure that I provided these resources. There are more out there. And of course, if you have questions or want the links to these sent to you separately, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to do that. And in terms of helpful resources, this was a quick guide that actually came from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics that talked about plant foods that can help meet your needs. And it touches on many of the nutrients we talked about just earlier. So that's a nice little handy handout, and feel free to take a screenshot if you need it. I'll just wait for 1 second. But yeah, putting it together, a vegan diet, while healthy, it can be challenging. I salute anyone who is able to successfully navigate the vegan diet because it is definitely a lifestyle change if it's new to you, but it can be very healthy and rewarding as well. Just be aware, taking a GLP-1 medication, it can add to the challenge of meeting your nutritional needs, especially if you're following a vegan diet. But it is definitely still possible to get enough protein from food and supplements when needed. And then just be aware that additional vitamins and minerals may need consideration, especially vitamin B12. And as always, when in doubt, use reliable sources. Use the ones I listed earlier. Feel free to reach out to the Premier Weight Loss staff, and they can get in touch with me if there's any questions. I know we're all more than happy to help at any time. And with that, I will open it up to any questions if they are out there. I'll wait for just a couple of minutes, as I know that I got started a little bit late. But feel free to select the Q&A button at the bottom left hand of the screen. If you do have a question, you can opt to be anonymous or leave your name, and I will be happy to answer. All right, well, I don't see any questions coming in. But if anything pops up later, or if you think of a question later on, or even want some screenshots of the previous slides, because I know I went through them kind of quick, feel free to reach out to the Premier Weight Loss staff. Always happy to provide you any answers that we can. And it was such a pleasure getting to speak tonight. And I hope to see you again in the next one. Thanks so much.